You're listening to the StoryShout podcast, hosted by Kelsey Jones. We're a weekly podcast dedicated to destigmatizing failure and laughing at our normalcy. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of StoryShout. My name is Kelsey Jones. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Lisa Beyer. Lisa is someone that I've met at marketing conferences and an industry friend of mine. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelsey. I'm honored to be a guest.
And Lisa, I'm so glad that you could come on today because I know as the author of Social PR Secrets and Digital Detox Secrets, one thing you're interested in is the future of PR and technology and how that intersects with health and wellness, which is something that applies to what we're going to talk about today. So with that being said, Lisa, what is something that you suck at?
I suck at saying no.
So specifically, I know we talked about before the call, like survival mode and burnout and all of that goes into saying no and obligations.
Yes, definitely. And burnout is kind of a buzzword right now, but I realized that I was suffering from burnout earlier this year, like January, February, and realized that I could not go on the way that I was. Otherwise, something was going to happen to me seriously, on a physical side of things. And I had to kind of like just say, okay, what is going on? And just put things on hold to get a grip.
Yeah, I know you just in the past, since I've known you, have done so much, like written books, ran a company, and I know you're really active with yoga and staying healthy. So what were some of the things that you kind of let fall to the wayside in order to climb out of that burnout?
Well, there's a test that you can take, and I'll give it to you after. You can put it in the show notes. There's a quiz that is like maybe 10 questions, and each question is weighted differently. And like the most heavily weighted question, and basically the test is, are you suffering from burnout? And if you get a certain score, then that's like your first indication that you probably are. But some of the things in that were, if you have a major move, if you, have a significant purchase, if you lose a spouse or, a significant loved one, those things can cause burnout. But if those things happen, in a short period of time, that's when like you can really go on the verge of burnout. So the pandemic is going to be on everybody's list, right? So that's going to get you a lot of points right there. So everybody's starting with a lot of points, right? And then, I had a bunch of other things, happen, good and bad, like, very good things happen. We sold our house during the pandemic and bought another house and renovated, and it was, all good. I had my most successful year in business. My husband had his most successful year in business. Getting tons of new business. And it was just a lot of moving parts happening at once. My daughter went away to college during the pandemic. A lot of stress and anxiety and depression related to that because of, your senior year in high school. So there's just so much happening in a 12-month period in my life that were on both sides of the equation, good and bad, that I just, I just didn't realize how much on overload I was. And I was trying to do too much in a matter of like, we only have, 24 hours in a day. So it was just kind of crazy. And I just was really starting to feel like I talked about this on my podcast, like the moment that I realized like something is definitely wrong was one of my clients' websites went down, and I was just like, oh my God, like I literally had like just this like flash of like what people who have suicidal thoughts feel like. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm feeling this feeling from a client's website going down, and the client isn't even really that upset about it. Like once I talked to them, and I just thought for a second, like, what if somebody from my team broke something and put the website down? And, It just was like that, just a flash. But I just stepped back and said, okay, this is like really ridiculous that I had this flash over this situation. It just showed me how spread thin I was, and that I just needed to really kind of take a step back and take a break. And what I did was I ended up going to this place called Canyon Ranch that I was there for about 9 days, and I kind of just went off the grid and was able to kind of like mentally just reset myself. But that's when I realized, when working with one of their life management coaches, that really part of my problem is that I've been in survival mode like my whole life. And so even though like you're successful and everything's great, like it's almost like never good enough, but you feel like, when's the other shoe going to drop? Or, that saying, like, when am I going to lose everything and then have to like start over? So I was like, I just never really looked at it like that. Like, this is what, why I'm like this. And a lot of women are like this, that I learned, because they feel like they're always trying to, prove themselves, and, prove that they are as capable or more capable, right, in a role. And also, depending on how you were brought up. So I was brought up by a single mom, and, just had to do a lot myself, and watched her have to struggle and do a lot herself. So it has a lot to do with like your patterns and how you're brought up. And a lot of entrepreneurs are also with the mentality of, you're always in survival mode. The most successful
Right.
people never stop, because they're afraid they're going to lose what they've earned, because they know what it's like before they started. So this whole survival mode is just, it's a vicious cycle that once you're aware of it, it becomes easier to deal with it. And that's why the whole thing with saying no, you never want to say no, because what if you miss an opportunity, right?
Yep. I know exactly how you feel. And I kind of talked about this with Robin Johnson when I recorded with her a couple weeks ago. And that episode will be published before this one does. But we both talked about how childhood shapes how we think about work and our value today. So for me, I had a step parent. He's no longer, here, that was verbally abusive. And so I feel you when you say, I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because then, you would think everything's fine. And then all of a sudden he would scream at you for coloring your hair or moving something in his car, like just situations you never could have imagined. So I think I translated that into situations that are high stakes for me now, whether that be work or, having kids or education or something like that. I always worry that if things are going really well, then something bad, that must mean something bad's on the horizon. And I think, like you said, it's being aware of the patterns is probably the biggest step you can take. And also therapy, I know if you can afford it, and there's lots of resources out there, is always helpful. But just thinking about, once you reach a certain level in your life, it's okay to start saying no to things, because saying yes can then be detrimental and lead to burnout, like what you're saying. So I think for a long time, I had a pattern that I'd always say yes because that meant more money, which in my brain meant more security. But what it means
Right.
now for me, when I say yes, is that could actually be detrimental to me. That could cause me to spend less time with my family if it's a work engagement, or cause me to eventually feel burned out if it's a job that's not right for me or a client that's not right for me.
Yeah. And my book, Digital Detox Secrets, the original name for that was going to be Space. But now the tagline is how to create space in your life for opportunity. And a lot of that has to do with, when you say no, you're taking up less space in your brain and in your
Mm.
calendar. And, you're, so that you can be free to be available to things that might serve you better. So, I mean, that's something that like I'm always working on. But to your point about your stepdad, so the first course, not course, but the first lecture that I went to when I got to Canyon Ranch, and literally I was like off the plane and like, checked into my room, and there was this lecture going on about trauma.
Mm.
And I really never even like thought that much about the word trauma. Like, to me, trauma was like, rape, or,
Hmm.
things that are. And this lecture, I learned so much about the different categories of trauma, and
Hmm.
how trauma can come in so many different ways. You can be born with trauma. So, like, if one of your parents were like a Holocaust survivor, like your DNA is that trauma that they went through. And then there's trauma of health issues, and there's trauma like what you're describing, emotional abuse trauma and physical abuse trauma. So many different categories that I realized that part of, who I am today, you're talking about, the patterns and how we grew up, is, I'm in this survival mode because of, different, I didn't even realize that they were traumas, but traumas that, I went through that were, I just, they're just kind of like memories. Like I just didn't like categorize them as something that significant that would be shaping me today. And I mean, some of them are very, some of what I've gone through would be considered extremely significant trauma, and some of it isn't. But there's a lot to be learned about. Like I, would encourage everybody to go and research trauma and the different types of trauma. And I can even forward you this PowerPoint from the lecture I went to that kind of goes into the different types, because once you understand that and you understand how trauma can really impact you in a positive way and a negative way, you can start dealing with the type of trauma that is affecting you.
Yeah, that's really a good point. And especially how you were saying affected you positively, because it took me a long time to realize what I've been through it's kind of cliche that everyone says this, but has shaped how I am. But that actually is beneficial in a way. I mean, of course, I'm not necessarily glad myself or anyone else goes through trauma, but the things that I've been through, I think I spent a really long time trying to hide from it or trying to stuff down, the memories I have in my brain, so viscerally still. And it was, when I was in high school and I was a teenager, instead just actually processing through that and thinking it through. I worked with a practitioner who does neuro-emotional technique, and it ties into how your thoughts translate into physical pain. And so she does this special technique, and it's really cool. Might be a little too hippy dippy for some people listening, but I think you'd probably like it. But then, she was also a chiropractor, so she would adjust me in certain ways, and I would talk through the trauma and talk through the really strong memories I have. And it really, really helped me process it, because I think I spent so much time and energy trying to push the most traumatic memories away, that if I would have just processed through it, and now that I've done that, it's so much less energy spent on that. And I can recognize that that was a part of my past, but that doesn't shape who I am now, meaning that it doesn't shape the decisions that I'm making now. And I have control in my life, not the person who was our abuser.
Yes. Have you heard of EMDR? It's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy.
I haven't done it, but I have a really good friend that did it, and really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so what that does is, I mean, that was originally came about through post-traumatic stress syndrome for people that went away to the different wars and experienced like severe trauma. And what that does, and I've been experimenting with it with myself and my daughter also. And what it does is it kind of reframes the brain so that you remember the incident that's causing you the trauma, but it's almost like in a third party type of way, that you're just the observer and it didn't really happen to you. So you're not really having that emotional kind of like baggage and weight on you from that memory, from that trauma. So I would, highly recommend looking into that. It's supported by like every type of medical and psychiatric and therapeutic association. So it's really not woo woo. Like some things are, and some things that are kind of like
Right.
woo woo do work. And I believe in most of those things. Like, one of the other things that I tried at Canyon Ranch was Qigong. And that was one of my one-on-one sessions that I didn't really know what it was. I really wanted to do Tai Chi. And,
Mm.
they both kind of fall into the same line of energy work. And I almost canceled it because I just was like, I just want to relax and I don't want to do something I'm not really sure what it is. And it was actually one of my most memorable sessions there. And it sounds similar to like what you experienced, where it kind of like works on your energy and your meridians. And now I'm like obsessed with it. I like love it. And I found a YouTube channel, and I, do it every once in a while when I'm feeling like I just need a little bit of a reset. So there's ways that, you don't have to go to Canyon Ranch to kind of reel yourself back in and create space to say, okay, what's going on in my life right now? And I think this is the most difficult I can ever remember life being, for this long, with the pandemic and
Right.
all the different pressures. And I mean, the news and the media and social media and, things that we have to kind of live on every day because we're in the business. But
Mhm.
it's really, there's a lot of emotional trauma happening to everybody just from what's happening in our in our world.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Definitely almost PTSD, from the length of the trauma, and everybody's had losses or significant things they've had to face during the pandemic. So it's just a lot. And I feel that too. I think I'm very empathic. So at the height of the pandemic, when masks were required inside last year, I didn't go to Target a lot because I could almost feel everybody's anxiety and everybody's like dis-ease around each other, and just like so worried, and you have to go out, and it's almost apocalyptic because you're here in Target, which is something you've done 100 times, but everybody's wearing a mask, and I just felt the energy, and it was just very draining. So I definitely agree with you that we're in like a prime time in our lives, to face the burnout and face the trauma as well.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging, and I think that it's also given a lot of people that never thought about mental health and wellness, like, they're realizing how important it is and how important it is to take care of themselves. And I mean, there's just people are getting sick and not surviving, and it's a huge stressor. So, I mean, I just was talking to somebody yesterday about just the price that we will pay for health.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're diagnosed, you hear this all the time, somebody's diagnosed with, stage 4 cancer. I mean, you ask them, like, they'll do anything to survive. They'll pay any amount of money, right? And they'll do fundraisers for their family. But we don't really give that type of weight to mental health and really taking care of our mental health. And, I'm not saying, start a fundraiser for your mental health, but at least invest in it, and invest in it as a preventative way. And it's just, I think that people are starting to realize that there is, more of a value to mental health than there used to be. It's actually something that people are putting on their priority list, but it's still, has a long way to go.
I agree. Well, and I think our industry too, and like technology, it definitely, I don't know if it's worse per se, excuse me, but I just feel like our industry, whether it's tech or marketing or whatever, it's almost like a badge of honor to be in survival mode, or to not feel burned out, but feel like you're so busy. I mean, I don't really see that anymore, because I agree with you. I think the perception's shifting. But I remember when I was younger in the industry, and I would talk to friends or colleagues at conferences, and they would say, I'm just so busy, so busy. And that's what you would always say. You never thought about that being a bad thing. And it wasn't even bragging. It was just like that was our normal, was being like so
Hmm.
overwhelmed and busy. And I think we've done a good job in the last year of at least moving towards shifting that. But, when I gained a whole bulk of my experience, I've totally fed into the hustle culture of
Hmm.
like work all the time. You can sleep when you're dead. You don't have kids yet, so you can work like 12 hours. Why would you turn down a client when you're trying to build a business? And so that definitely leads to burnout, though, and you can't just do that forever.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, extreme stress and lack of sleep leads to depression, and depression, leads to suicide and leads to burnout. And, that's what I was feeling. I was feeling like extremely depressed, and I never remember ever feeling that bad before.
Hmm.
So, and I feel like you're right. Like, our industry is, I feel like we got hit probably earlier than the majority of people got hit when it comes to like the impact of being 24/7 on social media and digital, because we're in the business. And,
Yeah.
I'm sure you were like on social, like, right away, and, for work reasons, not just for personal reasons. And, when you're working in that environment, when I wrote Digital Detox Secrets, that was like 4 or 5 years ago, and it was way before the pandemic. But I wrote it because I felt like this impact of digital, of, the 24/7 culture. And, all my clients, now, everything mattered 24/7. What was happening on social in the middle of the night, no matter what time zone, was, you know, something that you might have to address. Like, there's no boundaries. So, I feel like anybody that's in our industry, in the digital marketing industry, that's been in the industry for more than 10 years, we felt the impact of and stress of social before the majority of people who now understand what we're talking about, because everybody's on digital, everybody's in front of a computer on social for whatever reason because of the pandemic.
That's a really good point. Something I hadn't thought about is like our industry was so much more active on social media before everyone else. So we were probably more likely to get burned out sooner. And now, like what you're saying, the pandemic has kind of caught a lot of people up to what, people in tech and marketing were already feeling, is like just totally overwhelmed. And social media is important because it's for work, but I find myself, and I'm getting better at it, but I find myself just scrolling, doom scrolling, or going through this routine where I would wake up and I'd open Facebook and check it. And then I'd go open Twitter and check it. And then I'd look at my email, and it was just this cycle that really wasn't serving me. And I know a lot of people are trying to step away from that. And I think it does help, but I'd be interested to hear from your point of view, besides kind of going through that, digital detox, are there any other things that you've done that's kind of helped with the burnout?
Well, before, like one of the first steps I took was I looked at my calendar. I mean, this is just kind of like very actionable step that I recommend everybody to do, is I was just basically saying yes to meeting times that people were throwing out at me. So
Oh,
there was no rhyme or reason to my calendar, and I could have calls at 7 o'clock at night my time because it was, a different time zone, somebody else. Like I just did whatever, and I rolled that up and I said, okay, like I'm only available for meetings. And I didn't make an announcement on this. I just blocked my calendar Mondays and Fridays, no meetings, no calls, nothing. Like they're my days to work or brainstorm or, go to yoga without having to cancel something. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I had blocks of time that were available. And unless somebody like really had an issue, I would, adjust. But nobody questioned anything. I just called up some of my standing call meetings and said, look, like, do you mind if we switch this to Tuesdays instead of Mondays? Or, I give them my calendar link and here's what's available. And that helped a lot. That gave me some breathing space to actually like say, okay, like, I don't feel as out of control and spinning as I did. But it didn't, I still needed more than that, but that was one of the first steps I did. And then another step that I did that, you can do this at any time, is just put your autoresponder on for a day and just say you're working on a big project and you're not available. And that way you don't feel like you have to check your email or respond. And that helped a lot. I did that for like a month. Where I just said, if I said I'm taking a break, actually is what I said, but, and I just gave like direction on who to contact for anything that was necessary. And I still monitored it, but it just gave me some breathing space. And then, I talk about Canyon Ranch a lot. So not everybody can maybe have the time or resources to go to a Canyon Ranch, but you can create your own version of it. And maybe set aside a weekend where you're scheduled out like complete silence or complete, you're a full day of yoga and meditation, where there's all kinds of resources online right now to do something like that, and have a sacred spot in your home where you do this and it makes you feel good and it smells good and it, like, visually it feels good. So those are just some things that are helping to keep my sanity. I don't know if you can see this back there. Yeah. This
oh
painting back
yeah.
here. My
Yeah.
daughter and I, that's hers over there. So yeah, just doing something like painting. That was a course that I'm in the middle of taking called a 22-day painting and meditation challenge. And it's really just like 20 minutes a day. You don't need to be artistic at all, but it just really like is so helpful and kind of grounding and lowering your heart rate and calming yourself so that you can, rejuvenate.
I love that. And, to kind of wrap it up today, I'd like to also kind of get your insight on, I know we kicked off the episode saying like you were bad at saying no, but for someone who maybe, doesn't own a company and just works in a company, or is kind of starting out and might not have, the courage to push back maybe against their supervisors or against their partners or friends. Have you ever felt like that? And then are there some suggestions you have for someone that might feel anxious about saying no?
Yes. And I mean, the whole bottom line with saying no is having boundaries. And I think that could be a whole other, episode talking about boundaries. So, one comeback, if you are afraid to say no, is you could just say, let me think about it. And that gives you some power back to think about it and maybe craft a email response or, some sort of a response. But this was actually one of the things that came up when I was on one of my one-on-one sessions is that, practice saying no with the people that are easiest to say no to so that you can kind of get that practice. And then you're always going to have somebody that has like a very pushy personality that is going to push back at your no. And so if you practice with people that are easy to say no to, that will give you that practice.
I love that.
So there's going to be people that are going to be like, okay, no, and then there's going to be the people that are going to be challenging.
Yeah, I love that. Work your way up.
Yeah.
So if people listening want to learn more about you or your books, or I know you have a podcast, where can they do that?
The best place to go is thebuyergroup.com. And then you can find my courses, my podcasts, any of my resources, my links to my books would be there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Great combo. And I'm so happy we had you on.
Me too. Thank you, Kelsey.
Thanks, you too. And thanks to everyone else listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to the StoryShout podcast. Don't forget to review us on iTunes and connect with us on social media at StoryShout or online at storyshout.co. Until next time, stay normal.